It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast from Rome. Barbie Latza-Nadeau, correspondent at large for The Daily Beast, joins us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to welcome back from Paris, Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine. How are things?
Just great, thank you.
All right. A socially distant Pierre Hasky is also with us, international affairs commentator for French flagship public radio station France Inter. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Good evening.
And from Lewis in East Sussex, Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report. Nice to see you from the other side of the channel. All right, we seem to have an issue with the audio, Patrick. We're going to try to fix that right away. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. No pandemic was going to keep Argentina from its Evita moment. For hours on Thursday, they filed past the coffin of Diego Armando Maradona, the rags to riches hero of a nation, thanks to his footballing genius, a nation which moved out of the shadows of the generals and defeated the Falklands War. The rollercoaster fortunes of Maradona on and off the pitch long mirrored that of his country. The outpouring of grief, total after his death of a heart attack Wednesday at age 60.
El Diego del pueblo, el Diego de Argentina, el Diego del país.
El Diego era rebeldía. El Diego no tenés que sentirlo. No te puedo hablar 10 horas y no lo vas a entender. Tenés que ser futbolero, tener pasión. Y ahí vas a saber lo que es el Diego.
Diego was rebellion, Pierre Hasky. What were your thoughts when you saw that sometimes unruly procession outside the Casa Rosada, the Argentinian president's residence there on Thursday?
I was struck by the fact that there are not so many people, and I've counted only 2 or 3 in the past 20 years, whose image, whose power is just worldwide, and whose death is felt in the same way by almost every single human being on Earth. And I could only think of people like Nelson Mandela, for example, where his death was really resonated across the world, or I don't know, maybe entertainment people, but there are very few occasions in which the whole world has a common emotion when somebody dies. And I think that's a tribute to Maradona despite all his flaws, and definitely a tribute to the power of football.
The power of football, and the grief, by the way, was total on both sides of the Atlantic. Dateline Naples, the city that under Maradona won its first Italian league title in 1987.
The last time I felt such great pain was when I lost my father. I see my mother suffering as if she lost a child. She keeps watching television until 5 o'clock in the morning, just crying. Our family loved Maradona as a man, not as a celebrity.
Is it like that really, Barbie Latza-Nadeau?
Yeah, it really is. You know, you should just see the outpouring of grief in Naples over the last couple of hours, especially we've seen processions today. They're actually under lockdown, and they've defied the lockdown to go out and shoot red fire, tears into the sky in his memory. You know, this is a city, Naples, that has a number of murals with his face on the wall, and the number of children who were named Diego during the time that he was in Naples are now coming out saying, "I was named after him. I was named after him." They really feel that they've lost one of their own sons. Now they've forgiven all of his sins. They're treating him like a saint. They're going to rename the football stadium after him in the coming weeks as well.
This is a guy who departed Naples under the cloud of a 15-month suspension for at the time, and yet can you answer Pierre Hasky's question about why it is that this kind of outpouring, we haven't seen it since the death of Nelson Mandela?
Well, you know, I really think that a lot of it has to do with just how important football is to Italians and how important he was to the Napoli team. And, you know, this underdog team from the south of the country that was able to just do unthinkable things and remains, although they haven't done as well since, just remains to be sort of part of Italian football where it hadn't really been before. But, you know, the Italians use an Italian word to call him naughty rascal. That's what they refer to him as. He was really sort of one of them. You know, there were times when he would arrive at the airport and there would be many, many, many fans, but there would also be police or the finance police there waiting for him as well. But the Neapolitans sort of felt that he really represented them on some level.
Represented them, a naughty rascal. Patrick Smith, the whole planet identifies with this naughty rascal.
Well, that's right. I was just actually reading an appreciation of Maradona, slight critique perhaps by Asif Kapadia, who did that incredible film about Maradona. And of course, you know, the film gets to the roots of his life history, growing up literally in a shack, transporting water back to the family homestead, and then making it in the big time and taking his parents out of the grinding poverty, and then becoming this international celebrity with no one doubts the footballing genius and the footballing intelligence, which is a very specific sort of intelligence for soccer fans to appreciate. But also there was the way he handled the fame, and Azif talks about how he was no pushover in interviews. If you want to throw a difficult question at him about his personal life, his treatment of his girlfriends, wives, his tangling with drugs, etc., all the rest of it, you're going to get a really sharp answer back. So he was a real multifaceted person. It wasn't just the footballing genius, but there was a whole different side to his personality that Asif got into. And I guess, as you said, that what's where the naughty rascal comes into. That's what he was loved, not just for the genius, but also for the persona and the resilience.
Yeah, there's been talk about the hyperbole. What do you say when you say goodbye to an icon? God is dead. Headline French sports daily L'Equipe, which for one day traded in its traditional red masthead for the sky blue of Argentina's national team. Did you hear that, Vivian Walt? God is dead.
Absolutely. And when just listening to what Patrick had to say, one kind of has to wonder who among the football world of today would have such a kind of incredible reception when they're dead. And I'm not sure who would be. I think this really, in a sense, also captures a particular time in football history. And maybe it's a time that we don't have anymore. Football has become major, big global business. It involves big powers and international buyers and corruption scandals. And I just sort of feel that this captured a time in the beautiful game where you had this genius coming out of, as Patrick says, totally the wrong side of the tracks. He didn't have any movie star looks, and he became a worldwide celebrity. And
who Vivian was outspoken, who would speak out and who was associated with left-wing politics.
Absolutely. And in a country like Argentina that had been through, military rule, to, football became a kind of public expression for the whole country. It was, the expression of the masses. And no one more captured that than Maradona.
They say today's athletes play it too safe, don't use their notoriety enough to speak out, as Vivian was just pointing out. But some, many even, do put their names on the line. Case in point, French World Cup winning phenom Killian Mbappé of Paris Saint-Germain tweeting out dirty N-word, beaten by 3 policemen, it says, with an accompanying statement that concludes with a call to put a stop to racism. He's referring to the closed-circuit TV footage of a Paris music producer of Ivorian origin beaten by police. The video discrediting their statement that he struggled and lunged for their service weapon. A subsequent video that you can see here shows police tossing a tear gas canister inside from the street. It's the second episode of police brutality inside of a week and forced the government to react.
I've asked for the officer's suspension, and as soon as the justice system sheds light on what happened, I'll request that these officers be fired. They sullied the uniform of the Republic.
Pierre Aski, does France have a policing problem?
Yes, definitely. And I think, there's a very strange mirror effect between the US and France. And in a way, these images are our George Floyd moment, where somehow an event symbolizes a widespread problem that's been going on for years, which has been denied, minimized, or sometimes dealt with but never solved. And all of a sudden, now it's in the middle of the society. Even the president has expressed outrage. So we have
didn't we already have
problem,
that?
Which
didn't
is,
we already have that back in June? There were big Black Lives Matter protests in this country surrounding the death of Adama Traoré, and at the time, the previous interior minister said there'd be perhaps an end to chokeholds. He promised police reform. What happened?
Yes, but these demonstrations in June were related to an event that had happened 3 years earlier, which had no judicial outcome and was a long process, but there was not the kind of immediate emotion of something that has happened almost under our eyes. And in a very tense context, we are in a very special moment in France. The government is trying to push for a security law, which is raising lots of concern, lots of opposition. And all of a sudden, you have in the same week 2 incidents of police violence, which are really creating a political problem. And I think you have different interpretations. Some people think that President Macron has allowed his Minister of Interior to give a free hand to the police because he wants to gain votes on the right. I think it might also be a problem of incompetence, that the authorities in charge of controlling the police or of commanding the police are just incompetent, and the police feel they have a free hand because there's not the political reining in that is needed in situations like that. And I think that's a very, very difficult political moment. And if there's no solution, it might get worse.
Might get worse. So two scenarios there spelled out. And again, as Pierre was saying, it's all happening the same week as the lower house of parliament approved a security bill, a draft bill for now, one that would broaden law enforcement powers and restrict the right to film police. Has the Emmanuel Macron, who served under a socialist government, ran as a centrist, taken a right turn? Or Vivian Walt, is this, as Pierre suggests, possibly incompetency in the hierarchy of the police?
I think this can be answered in one word. 2022, the next election. Macron is clearly feeling the heat from the right wing. He thinks that's going to be his big challenge. And he's clearly tilted to the right. There's just no doubt about it. It's been, very evident since he appointed his new prime minister and government. And I think what's worrying is actually the element of the security law that would stop people from distributing images of police officers. This really, I think, got under the skin of a lot of people, including, of course, us journalists. But more than that, it just seems to give police impunity, and we would not know about them beating up this music producer this week had it not been for videos that were captured. I just want to say one other thing, and since you mentioned Killian Mbappé, that we should not forget that the US superstar Megan Rapinoe actually months ago called on Killian Mbappé to come out and speak out about Black Lives Matter, and was asking where France's, athletes were in this whole debate. It's taken a while, and perhaps it's taken this incident this week to really shake people into speaking out.
A watershed moment, Patrick Smith?
Yes, I think so. And as you alluded to the security law that's going through the French National Assembly, I mean, the timing could not have been any more poignant. As these cops were beating up the record producer, the Parliament was actually discussing this Article 24, which is intended to introduce this ban on the distribution of video footage of police actions. So it was almost like the cops were sabotaging the logic of the bill as they were beating this guy up. The deputies were having to consider this proposal. It now looks like it's not going to go through, or it's certainly going to be the subject of wide public debate. I think there's going to be a public commission on the matter before it goes to the Senate afterwards. And I do think it's a turning point, not just for France, but for Europe. And I think certainly in Britain and to some extent Italy and Germany, as well as France, there's been this sense of when Black Lives Matter took off in the US, well, yeah, I mean, our cops are deficient, but at least they're nothing like that. And there's certainly been the reaction in Britain. But what's come out on social media in Britain, as well as on France, has been numerous incidents of police brutality and racism. So I think it's going to, in a sense, as Pierre said, it's going to reflect the Black Lives Matter movement in the States, and it's going to amplify it. And then I think it will bounce back to the States again. And they say, well, this movement is not just something that you can tie to the particular history of the United States, but it's right across the Western world, in Western Europe and the US. So I think it's important from a national, but also an international.
International perspective. We're going to pick up with a final thoughts on this point when we come back. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Daily Beast correspondent at large, Barbie Latza-Nadeau, joins us from Rome. Welcome back as well to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. Pierre Hasky, international affairs commentator for flagship French public radio station France Inter. And from Lewis in East Sussex, Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report. Barbie Latza-Nadeau, I want to pick up on a point made by Patrick Smith there about how what started in Minneapolis has gone global. What are the thoughts where you are about the French policing and the controversy here? And has there been this sort of incident in the recent past where you are?
Well, you know, when you talk about the national security law that's up, that could be voted in France, you know, that's something that's been debated here in Italy for quite some time. If there's a way to stop the press from showing what the police are doing. And, you know, every single time you sort of rob the press of their freedom to report what's going on, you allow more injustices to happen. And I think that that's what happens to a large part here. It's very difficult to record the police here. If, you know, I've been with crews that do it, that shoot the police, and they make you erase the tapes and things like that. So while it's not a law here, it's certainly in practice. And I think if you don't see a George Floyd incident or an incident like you've seen in France, there's not going to be the outrage. And I think what happens so often here in Italy is nobody sees it, so therefore it didn't happen on some level.
How to prevent further war crimes. So we're talking not about Europe, but about Ethiopia. It's more than just a premonition. There's been at least one major massacre documented since the start of the month. Troops making their way north this Friday towards Tigray. This after the expiration of an ultimatum to the rebel province and the Ethiopian Prime Minister's announcement of an all-out offensive. Tigrayans make up a little over 5% of Ethiopia's population, but for decades after the 1991 fall of the Mengistu regime, Under the leadership of Meles Zenawi, they held the levers of power. Now it's come to a head, with last year's Nobel Peace Laureate Abiy Ahmed talking of a move on Mekelle, the regional capital, with thousands fleeing across the Sudanese border. Patrick Smith, there's a feeling of helplessness. There's already been one major massacre, tens of thousands who've fled across borders, more have been displaced, and it looks like it could get worse. What can we do about it?
Well, what the African Union is doing, and sadly, belatedly, is to try to engage the government in Addis Ababa. So you had these three African Union envoys today meeting with Abiy Ahmed in Addis. That's the former president of Liberia, former president of Mozambique, both of whom have lived through their own terrible civil war, so they know about what they're talking. They didn't seem to get very far. What they were trying to do was to get Abiy to call some sort of ceasefire so there can be an engagement. And so far, the Ethiopian government line has been, well, any sort of ceasefire is just going to give the Tigray ruling party, the Tigray peoples, the chance to kind of get off the hook and just bog it all down in talks. At the end of the day, they say they're targeting the TPLF rather than the Tigray region as itself. But unfortunately, the 5 million people you talk about are going to have been drawn into this war. Mekelle, the capital that the federal troops from Addis Ababa are marching on, normally has a population of about 500,000. We're hearing that there's several 100,000 people more. So there are more and more civilian lives at risk. So I think if the AU attempts at mediation fail, what you're going to see is some sort of push from the United Nations. But at the moment, what I think the last point I wanted to make, but I think is an important one, is a divided international diplomatic effort with the EU saying, yes, you must have a ceasefire. Yes, there must be some sort of mediation to bring this conflict to a halt as soon as possible. And the United States government, in the form of Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, and Thibault Nage, the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, actually saying, no, the federal forces are absolutely right. They should be allowed to finish this off, and we support them. So the international response is very inchoate at the moment. So no immediate action looks like it's on the horizon.
A split international community, Vivian Walt, and an Ethiopian prime minister who says, thanks for showing interest, but this is a domestic problem.
Well, what's amazing, of course, as Patrick pointed out, is that it's only a year since he won the Nobel Peace Prize. So, and here he is kind of with the stance as if, you know, we have to defeat the TPLF and seeing this really as an existential threat to his country. And essentially turning away offers of negotiating some sort of a peace deal. So, I mean, I think what we're staring at really is a kind of looming humanitarian crisis, or, you know, I guess one that is already unfolding, but that looks like it could get a lot worse with, you know, the Red Cross reporting that they have set ambulances on fire and that they're running out of medicines. This could be really very, very bad.
And when you see that there was this massacre that took place, Pierre Aski, at the start of the month in Mai Kadra, which targeted non-Tigrayans, and there have been reports of massacres in the other direction, neither side seeming to want to stand down at this point. Some are saying this could be another Rwanda. Is that an exaggeration?
I think the comparison that is maybe more relevant would be with Yugoslavia, because you know, we have Ethiopia is an empire, or was an empire, but still has the shape and the composition of an empire. And what could be at stake is the unraveling of the different regions and the fabric of the whole country. And I think that explains the very tough attitude of Abiy Ahmed, which obviously contradicts his initial steps when he was elected the head of the government, because he was seen as a liberal. He released political prisoners. He opened the economy. He made peace with Eritrea. And all of a sudden, we have the face of a leader who is taking ruthless decisions, because that's my maybe analysis, is that he doesn't want Ethiopia to unravel, and he wants to make a stop with Tigray, that you cannot just split from the country.
Is there room for compromise the way you set it out there?
Not really, no. I think both the history, the fact that the TPLF was in power for so long and has fallen out with Abiy Ahmed, and what is at stake, which is the unity of the country, and the fact that Abiy Ahmed doesn't want the Tigray precedent to serve other parts of the country, like the Somaliland or whatever, the Somali region and so on. There could be really, including Abiy Ahmed's own ethnic group, the Oromos, which have been really demonstrating against the central power in recent months. And I think that doesn't leave much room for compromise or for negotiations.
Barbie Lazzanado, a scene from the former colonial power Italy, that prospect of Ethiopia unraveling, is that something people are contemplating?
Well, you know, it is part of the discussion here, because situations like this always produce a lot of refugees who are on the move, who inevitably try to enter the European Union through Italy. So there is obviously going to be a sort of, backroom deal trying to be made in terms of the negotiations and trying to broker peace by the European Union. But a lot of that is simply because they don't want to have to deal with a humanitarian crisis that has already unfolded, but it's just going to get worse as the crisis there continues.
One final word on this, Patrick Smith. We're in that strange period right before Inauguration Day in the United States. You mentioned Tibor Nagy, who himself is a former ambassador to Ethiopia. Does it all change after January 20th?
Well, it's already looking like that, because what is remarkable about the briefing that Tibor Nagy gave last week, at the same time, Joe Biden's new national security advisor put out a statement expressing grave unease about what was going on in Ethiopia and raising the specter of petitions about war crimes and the humanitarian crisis, which he, in backing the UN system, raised as a major, a looming disaster, in fact, and saying that there would be efforts to hold people to account. So it seems that even within the US, the Biden team has a very different view on this to the outgoing Trump team.
Well, speaking of the Trump team, we had this quote from the President of the United States, the outgoing president: "We're like a third world country." Donald Trump speaking at a Thursday press conference that followed a round of golf and the annual Thanksgiving Day pardon of a turkey. It's more than 3 weeks after Election Day. Donald Trump slowly, very slowly it seems, coming around a little bit.
So if the Electoral College does elect President-elect Joe Biden, are you not going to leave this building?
Just so you, certainly I will. Certainly I will. And you know that. But I think that there will be a lot of things happening between now and the 20th of January. A lot of things. Massive fraud has been found. We're like a third world country. We're using computer equipment that can be hacked.
Vivian Walt, when he says there's going to be a lot of things happening between now and January 20th, should we take him at his word?
Yes, I do think so. I mean, I think that he will certainly use this opportunity to, pardon his friends, of course, as we're already seeing, rush through some executive orders that people have been expecting him to do for a while now. For example, Tick is just one example of something he's spoken about for years, which is taking away people's automatic right to U.S. citizenship if they're born in the U.S. And there are a range of measures that he could do within the next 7 weeks that he is still the one and only president of the United States. I think what's more worrying is what comes after. And those who are celebrating Biden's win, and there are many of them, should sort of relish this moment because things could get very complicated very quickly once he takes office after January 20th.
You hear that, Barbie Ladza-Nadeau? This is the time to relish. It's going to get a lot tougher after January 20th. You agree?
Yeah, I do think so. I don't think Joe Biden's going to have much of a honeymoon. I think, you almost envision hearing the paper shredders going on inside the Oval Office right now. You don't know what he's going to be inheriting. All we know is what we're seeing. We don't know what we're not seeing. And I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Biden to make any sense of anything especially with the pandemic, as it will be after Christmas, the surge in the numbers and things like this. But it'll take him a long time to make sense for the people who didn't vote for him and for the people who did to a large extent. But the United States is divided. It's a mess. It's a really hard thing to watch your country like this from outside the country, and I can't possibly imagine how this is going to get any better before it gets ultimately a little bit worse.
Well, listen to the president-elect. He admits it's been a real stress test of democracy and U.S. institutions this election, yet he gives an upbeat appraisal.
Our democracy was tested this year. And what we learned is this: the people of this nation are up to the task. In America, we have full and fair and free elections. And then we honor the results. The people of this nation and the laws of the land won't stand for anything else.
Does that sound a little like a mission accomplished speech? You remember that George W. Bush gave after the Iraq War there, Pierre Haski?
Well, obviously, Joe Biden is trying to push on the positive side. But, there was some truth in what Donald Trump said when he said we are like a third world country. He behaves like a third world country ruler who refuses defeat. And that's going to leave a long impact on the political world in the US, because despite what Joe Biden just said, we've just heard, there will be a large proportion of the Republican electorate, voters, who will not recognize Joe Biden as a legitimate president of the country. And that might not prevent him from ruling, obviously, but it's going to create lots of problems, particularly if the Senate remains in Republican hands. And don't forget that there is another battle coming early January for the 2 remaining seats in Georgia. And Donald Trump is flying to Georgia next week to support the Republican candidate. So we still haven't seen, and that's another truth from Donald Trump, a lot can happen between now and January 20th.
A lot can happen. And you heard earlier, Pierre, how Patrick Smith described rival diplomacy when it comes to Ethiopia. Your thoughts on the news this Friday that a top Iranian scientist had been assassinated, with many wondering if that's because, with lots of fingers being pointed at Israel, there is this sort of window of opportunity for this kind of extrajudicial killing?
Be a genius in geopolitics to understand that Iran is today the focal point of this non-transition between Trump and Biden. Only a few days ago, we had this meeting, secret meeting, or so-called secret meeting in Saudi Arabia between Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, with Mike Pompeo attending. And everybody understood that part of the agenda of that meeting was to warn Biden about Iran. We know that Joe Biden wants to restore one way or another discussions with Iran about the nuclear deal that Donald Trump tried to kill. And all these moves, whether it's the Saudi meeting or the killing of this scientist in Tehran, are aiming at creating a burned field where Joe Biden will not be able to resume the nuclear deal.
Patrick Smith, it's November the 27th, and we don't have a proper concession yet from the President of the United States. Is this all playing out the way you imagined it?
It's marginally better, I have to say. I think, Francois, last time we talked about this before you headed on your private jet to cover the elections, we were pretty downcast about what was going to happen. We thought it was going to be far closer than it was, and a long, drawn-out fight with it being, on a knife edge. I mean, at least we have a pretty clear result. For the Democrats, it wasn't the landslide they wanted, but it was a clear victory at the executive level. And I think Trump's admission yesterday that, yes, when the Electoral College rules next month, that will be his moving ticket out of the White House. I think that does end that particular chapter. But I absolutely go along with Pierre about all the foreign policy snafus and ructions that are likely to happen between now and 20th of January, when Biden's going to be inaugurated. It's probably worth saying that if the Democrats do win the Senate, they're president to come in and help them on the critical votes. It won't give them a clear path on domestic policy, but they can. The president, Biden, will have a much greater leverage on foreign policy. And the weird thing about that is that is the stuff that Americans care least about, but that he will be able to do the most. And if you look at his new team, it's very much a team that is focused on building back strong relations with Europe, particularly the European Union, and Japan and South Korea and so on, and Canada and so forth, Africa too, Latin America. So I think you're going to see a big pushback. They're going to get back into the Paris Climate Accord on the first day of the new government. I think they're going to find a way to restructure and then impose that Iran deal somehow. So I think you're going to see a number of moves in that direction. But I think the critical domestic things are going to be much harder. How to get the spending through. And
let me just, and this will be the final word, Barbie Latza Nadeau, of course, on day one, the big issue will be COVID. And here we're struggling on how to handle Christmas. You have the Thanksgiving holiday this weekend and the Christmas holidays coming up. Your thoughts on the state of mind America will be in on January the 20th?
Well, who's left standing? I think there'll be so many more deaths by then that, Biden is going to be inheriting this drastic situation caused by these holidays. And, you just look at some of the TV coverage of everybody traveling for Thanksgiving, which is, my favorite holiday too. But people just didn't understand that they shouldn't travel this year. And the airports were full, elbow to elbow, everybody's mask below their nose if they had one on. And it's as if you're watching, you know how the movie's going to end here. And it's going to be really bad. There's no question. It's going to be a lot worse because Americans aren't listening to the science. And they don't have a president right now that told them to do so. They will have a president that suggests they do, but it'll be too late by then for a lot of people.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you, Barbie, for joining us from Rome. I want to thank as well Vivian Walt in Paris, Pierre Aski in the French capital, and Patrick Smith in Lewis, England. I want to thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.